Now we'll call a meeting to order. Do we have roll call, please, Marie?
Mrs. Rail? Here. Mrs. Lee?
Here.
Mrs. Medina?
Here.
Mr. Krings?
Here.
Mr. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Bembo?
Here.
Mrs. Head?
Here.
Okay, the first item on our agenda tonight is discussion and possible action to approve pitch facility lease agreement.
Okay, I brought the lease agreement to you last month, and there were a couple of comments from you on that, so I would ask you to turn to page 2 so that you can see the changes that we made. It was in the bottom paragraph there where the lessor has priority of the premises between 8:30 and 2:30 Monday through Friday. We included then except on weekdays when school is not in session, because that's when Boys and Girls Club would primarily be using it. So that was one change that had been requested. On page 3, about 2/3 of the way down, it says in case of any upgrade to the lessee's computer systems, or the network was also included. That was something that, in talking with our tech guys, Phil felt we should include that. I would go then to page 7. And the question of right of first refusal came up, and after talking with the attorney, he indicated that the language as presented basically says that an offer has to be acceptable to us. So if somebody came forward and said, we're going to pay you, $1 million for pitch, and we'll do it in cash in 30 days, then we would perhaps go to Boys and Girls Club and say, we have an offer, within 30 days we can have $1 million. Can you meet that? So they would have the option to meet that. So first of all, the offer would have to be something we'd even entertain. And then secondly, we would say to them they would have to meet it under the same parameters. And he said that's what the language is intended to indicate there. So I felt comfortable with that. Down below, the option to purchase, we put in an amount of $3 million. We did have conversation around about this. We've had numerous conversations with Rob Weefel at the Boys and Girls Club. At this point, that would be the price that we would propose. We did have an appraisal done, which we would keep at this point to ourselves as a result of the fact that there could be for future negotiations. So I think $3 million is a reasonable, based on the appraisal that we got. I can tell you that it was a very strong appraisal, and based on how I've seen other buildings selling, school buildings selling, a very strong appraisal, because the building is in such excellent condition. Many of the buildings, the school buildings that districts are attempting to sell, are either needing roof repair or plumbing or electrical issues, and our building is right up to speed. So they had a difficult time finding comparables, which is what took them a little bit longer in getting an appraisal to us. So we feel comfortable with that particular asking price, also given the nature of what it would cost to replace that building if we were to have to build in the future. So that's where that dollar comes from. The final changes were on page 9. He had to make a correction under number 22. He put set forth below because it just didn't make sense. That if there's any communication in writing, then the addresses are right below, not in the first paragraph. We switched our address to 510 Peach Street and changed his title to Executive Director. And the final change was to put John in as Board President and take Mary's name out of that. Then you'll notice there are 2 blank pages. One is a legal description of the property, which we have, and we would simply, type that in as an addendum to the lease. And then finally, there's also a layout of the building, which is simply the blueprint, and you would have that as well. So the description on the deed is the same as the description that the individual who gave us a letter of report had included in her documents. So I don't know if you have other questions or comments or concerns. I feel comfortable with the lease. Is it something different than we've done before? Absolutely. But I feel quite comfortable with that the lease is a good one and it protects you as a board. It also allows us then to engage in a conversation and a relationship with the Boys and Girls Club in a more distinct manner.
I would move we approve the proposed pitch lease agreement with the Boys and Girls Club as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, then a motion and a second to approve the proposal.
Do we need an effective date on that?
Okay, Larry, would you care to amend your motion to include effective July 1, 2013?
Do we need it?
Well,
Okay.
the lease as presented, but if you want to add clarity, that's fine.
Sure, we should add clarity to it.
And I would,
Okay.
Okay.
All right, there's a motion and a second to approve the proposal to enter into a pitch facility lease agreement with the Boys and Girls Club as presented, effective July 1, 2013. Maureen, could we please have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Hunt,
Yes.
Mr. Bembo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Krings.
Yes.
Mrs. Royal,
Yes.
Mrs. Medina.
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, and the next item is discussion and possible action to amend the 2012-2013 district budget.
The biggest change to the budget is a proposal to prepay or to defease some debt service bonds that are maturing over the next 5 years. If you look at the sheet that you have in front of you, the top portion is revenue for the general fund, and in the middle section is the expenditures for the general fund. The third to last item under the expenditures, transfers to other funds. That is proposal to transfer $1 million from the general fund, just over $1 million, into the debt service fund, and that would provide funds needed to defease all of the 2005 bonds. That hasn't been approved yet, so but that's what's in this budget here. So I don't know, maybe you want to table this until we get to that section on the bonds, because this budget change takes into account that action by the board.
Okay, so table.
In other words, we're going to discuss in a few minutes defeasance of another bond, and in other words, paying off one of the 4
Right,
remaining that we have.
And that
And
changes.
if you make this change, that would be part of the dollars that would go towards that. So don't make this change until you've heard about defeasing debt, and
Okay.
does that make
I
sense?
mean,
Yeah, sure. Just table it for now.
so
But
I mean,
that's-
we can go over this right after you take it, whatever action you take on that. would affect this.
And would you like to move into item 5, discussion and possible action on resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, the establishment of an escrow account with respect to, and the defeasance of the general obligation refunding bonds dated March 15, 2005. I'm guessing where we're next.
Okay. This is an action similar to what you did a year ago, where you prepaid, and I forget what year that was, one whole bond issue. There's 4, yeah, that's right, there's 4 bond issues out there currently. This will eliminate 1 bond issue, the 2005 bond issue, and there would be 3 remaining. The 3 remaining bond issues would be the bond that was done to refinance the WRS employee benefit, retirement benefits through the Wisconsin retirement system. There's a QZEB bond out there, and then there's a bond that came with the last referendum for remodeling of the facilities around the district. Those would be the only three big bond issues you'd have if you went ahead and defeased this debt. What defeasance means is that you're taking current money, vesting it with an escrow agent, and they then assume responsibility for paying those bonds as they mature. The benefit to the district is it takes these bond issues off your books. You get state aid on the payment next year because we're doing it in this fiscal year, and it makes your balance sheet, well, depending on how you look at it, it makes your balance sheet look better long term. The other benefit is that, and I say this is the second item, it increases your state aid for next year. And what that does, under the way the revenue limit is structured, it decreases the tax levy. And that's the main reason, it's one of the main reasons we're looking at it at this point, because we'd like to keep the tax levy being proposed as low as possible. Any questions?
Along with that, it should save us interest payments as well.
Yes, it saves us a substantial amount of money. That's the fourth item. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Which is a big one, too.
I was looking more at the short term, decreasing your tax levy for next year.
And when was this bond due?
These bonds are due over the next 6 years.
Next 6 years?
There's actually a payment due next April, so it takes care of that, and then for the next 5 years after that. The one item, what it does is, we were planning to put money into fund balance to decrease the amount of short-term borrowing. This actually takes that money, instead of going to fund balance, it goes to pay off the debt service. So you need to understand that also.
In other words, we would still be short-term borrowing in a similar amount to last year.
A similar amount.
Yeah, hopefully it'll stay to pay faster this year.
Are there any changes at the state level that would make this a problem, the actions we're taking?
No, not this kind of transaction. This is a pretty standard transaction that's been done for many, many years.
Oh, we've done it in the past.
Interest rates being low encourage you to do this.
Yes, we get a better bang for our dollar by repaying this debt than we would than the short-term. The short-term rates are still low and expected to stay low for a little while yet. Not for months, but not years into the future. So I expect the short-term borrowing we do for next year to be at a similar rate or very close to what we did for this year. Which makes this something of interest to the board. You're paying off a higher interest rate at this time.
So as a board member, the things you want to consider are, the tax levy, paying off the debt versus putting dollars into fund balance, because my goal ultimately would be to get enough in there that we can not have to short-term borrow. But that delays that a little bit.
The board still has an interest to put money in the fund balance, and we're proposing that in the next year's budget. So you'll see that in there.
Any other questions?
I would make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, the establishment of an escrow account with respect to and the defeasance of the general obligation refunding bonds dated March 15th of 2005.
Second.
A motion is second to approve the resolution authorizing transfer of funds, the establishment of an escrow account with respect to and the defeasance of the general obligation refunding bonds dated March 15, 2005. Can we please have a roll call vote, Marie?
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mrs. Rayo?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mrs. Head?
Yes.
Mrs. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Krings?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, now, where would you like to go next, Dan?
We'll
Down
go
to
back
6
to,
or back up to 4?
Back up to 4.
Back to the budget amendments that I've made here include repaying that debt, which you just approved, and transferring sufficient funds from Fund 10 into the debt service fund, not only to repay this debt, but also to pay, the way the statutes read, you have to have sufficient funds in Fund 27, Fund 39 to cover your debt obligations for the next year. Otherwise, you need to levy for those. This would allow you not to have to levy a debt service levy next year. In addition to this transfer, in addition to paying off that bond issue that you just. Let's see. There's also changes to other funds. They're small compared to that transaction. You'll see Fund 21 at the bottom, first page on the back side. There's some changes to Fund 27. We've got some additional special education aid, sponsor aid, and that went to cover special education costs, which then were not paid out of the general fund. So you see the same amount coming in as revenue and expense. Fund 29, there was a small increase in the budget amount there. That's also a federal grant and pays for one program that we have. You'll see some changes in Fund 38. That was a refinancing of that was done back in July, if you remember. Even if you don't remember, that's what it was. And it's just adjusting the revenue down. The interest earned was not what was in the budget, or will not be what was in the budget originally. Then you'll see Fund 39. That $4 million increase there is what you just approved now to repay that bond issue. Food service fund, just some minor changes. Significant decrease. Let's see here. It's Fund 50. Oh, I see. In Fund 50, there's one line at the top of the third page. That's the expenditure change. So there's an increase in revenue of $33,000 and a decrease in expenditures of $10,000 in the food service fund. And then Fund 73, there's a decrease both in the revenue and the appropriation. The reason for the decrease in the revenue is the revenue comes from Fund 10, and it's based on a calculation of the retirees and what their insurance costs are. And as that decreases, then also the revenue decreases, but then also the expenditures decrease out of Fund 73. And then Fund 80, you'll see two minor changes there. Are there any questions you have on those? The reason for board approval on this is DPI wanted us to make all these changes online, which I did, because they wanted to use that to project our state aid for next year. So I did so I actually entered these changes on the state website, which closed last Friday, so they could do the computation. But anyway, so the board still needs to approve these changes, budget changes.
Any other questions for Dan on this? I'd entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the 2012-2013 district budget as presented this evening.
Second.
Okay, motion is second to approve the proposed amendments to the 2012-13 district budget as presented. Maureen, could we please have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Krings?
Yes.
Mrs. Rayo?
Yes.
Mrs. Hett?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mrs. Lee?
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, next is item 6, presentation of the 2013-14 district budget.
I'm just going to start with a brief description to you of our budget shortfall this year and some of the reductions that we made that you've kind of approved along the way, but we haven't had a full picture of it perhaps. So I just put together a document. It just says 2013-14 at the top. Budget shortfall, we had declining enrollment, which we've continued to have over the last several years. There is a dollar amount that the state puts in to the worksheet. That dollar amount was $893,000. We won't have that next year, so we have to make sure that we cut that out of the budget. Prior year levy reduction was $59,000. The per pupil aid reduction, and we shared with you earlier last year how we received $50 per pupil. That was no longer being offered. It was a one-year only deal, and so that was $264,000. Our health insurance premium, the increase of $920,000, and again, I'm kind of rounding off some numbers. And education is the credits that we pay as teachers work through and get DEUs and credits. We've allotted that amount for the budget. So our total deficit then was $2,537,000. What did we do to find those dollars? We had a reduction in a position in our RTI funding. We had a person funded differently, and in essence, the job duties are being distributed differently, so we didn't need to fund that particular position anymore. In other words, somebody else is doing it, and it's been split out among several people. Staffing and scheduling, as you know, teachers went to teaching from 5 to 6 sections, and we also had a number of staff reductions to the tune of $1,193,000 approximately. Buildings and grounds, there were some positions, we had retirees, and we were not anticipating filling those. The HRA at this point, we believe, has accrued a savings of about $480,000 for us. And I think we'll have a final probably next week, once this school year closes out as far as claims go. We did not do any overloads. We discontinued doing any overloads. It used to be that if teachers taught 5 and then they taught a 6th section, that was considered an overload and there was pay attached to that. With everybody teaching 6, that is no longer the case. And then the hold harmless, which is something that is also on the budget worksheet from the state, and that amount is set at $496,000. So if you look at those two numbers, we're still looking for $92,000. However, because the state has given us $75 more in categorical aid per pupil, there is about $392,000 more. So that will take care of, or $396,000 more, that will take care of the remaining shortfall, and then we'll have some dollars available for salary increases potentially.
I believe that was in the budget they just passed last week.
Is that the 150 per pupil, or?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't work out.
It doesn't
like
work
that.
exactly like that, but it's the 75. The hold harmless normally would be more, but because they're putting $75 into categorical aid, that diminishes the hold harmless, but gives us cash in a different location. So it basically balances out. It's kind of a wash. Anything else that you would add to?
No.
I just
I was
wanted
going
the
to-
board to have sort of a picture of, the work that we've done with the shortfall and the reductions that we've made to meet the budget, and we are there. But it seemed to be a good segue for you then to.
Yes. Some of the numbers Dr. Dickman just mentioned are on the sheet that we're going to look at next. And it's actually the first document, if you look on the budget meeting documents, it's the first document that you come to. And this is known as the revenue limit formula. And I think I'll just walk through it and point out where some of the numbers I've just mentioned came from. Basically, what the sheet does is it takes your prior year's revenue limit amount, and that's that section in the top left-hand corner there. The total base revenue of $53,234,689. That's last year's revenue limit, with a few minor modifications. But in other words, they take your general aid, your computer aid, your tax levy, and then that non-recurring exemption. Last year the amount was $948,000, so that was the year before, and that goes in there, and that's what Dr. Dickin was talking about when she mentioned that the $893,000 comes out. That's where it comes out. The next section is a 3-year rolling average of our enrollment. And what they do is they take a 3-year average and compare it to a 3-year average, which includes next September's count.
And this is FTE, it's not actual bodies of children. So you'll see our number is $5,300, but that includes 4-year-old kindergarten, for example. They're not counted as a full FTE.
The count is a
Because they're half day.
0.6. And it adds in summer school. You do get something for summer school there. You'll see there's a line for summer school. And so the 2013 is a projection. We're just, I mean, it's not a shot in the dark, but it's a projection. We don't know if those students will show up or not, or if more students will show up or not. But we're projecting 90 for summer school. The reason is we had our summer school is 1 day shorter this year than it will be next year. So we believe we'll get back to 90 for student count for summer school. Then you take 40% of that and you're down to 36. And then we're projecting a slight decline again for September. We had a large graduating class this year and a few are coming in kindergarten. And then you take those two numbers and you do a calculation and you come up with a declining enrollment exemption. What they do is they take your revenue limit and multiply it times your decline in students, and you come up with a declining enrollment exemption, which they hold off for 1 year, but then you lose that money next year. That number gets shifted across the sheet to right. If you look right in the center, you'll see a $893,000 on the right side of your sheet.
10B.
And we'll come to that number when we start going down that side. The bottom corner of the right-hand side is your computer aid calculation. Again, this is just a projection. What you do is you look, well, what I do is I look at historically what our computer aid has been doing, what our valuation for computers has been doing, and try to project what the exempt computer values will be in the district.
Do you want to clarify what that money is exactly? I mean, what does that mean? Exempt, I mean...
Well, okay, businesses that have computer equipment that is taxable for property tax, the state gives them or pays us to exempt them from having to pay property tax on that computer equipment. So we actually get a payment from the state to pull this equipment off the tax rolls. That follow? Why it's done that way, I don't know. But it's in the calculation. And so it's something we have to calculate in every year. At one time, it was over $200,000 of property value that was taken off tax rolls. And we got the money from the state, and we actually taxed that much less. Through the years, as computer equipment has gone down in value, so has this. You'll see now, you don't see it, okay, there you see it. 146,566. Tax aid for exempt computers. That's on line 17. That number also gets shifted across to the right-hand side as we work our way through. Jumping up to the top on the right-hand side, and if you got questions, just jump in, okay? You'll see $53,234,689. That is the calculation that occurred on the left-hand side. That's the revenue limit value from last year. Then you divide it by the number of students that you had, the rolling average you had through last year. The 3-year rolling average was 5285, and that's not enrollment. That's taking kindergartners at 60%, 4-year-old kindergartners at 60%. It's taking summer school at 40%. So there's some modification to that number. So it's not just bodies. It's a calculated number, and you come up with a per member revenue limit of $10,072.97. So that's your starting per member value, revenue limit value going forward. The state has just approved a $75 increase to that amount. So you add the $75 to that amount, and you come up with $10,147,797. And take that number times what we project to be our new 3-year rolling average, and you get a revenue limit of $53,243,689. However, there's a hold harmless provision which has not been in place for the last 2 years, but has been reinstated for this year. What that does is it says that you won't fall below a prior year's revenue limit. And so what happens is,
When you have declining enrollment.
when you have declining enrollment, so what happens is, we really would have $52,738,000 in revenue limit, but that gives us an extra $496,624, moving us to the $53,234,689. The next item you see is $46,288. What that is you're allowed to increase your revenue limit by transfer service. Transfer service is any student coming into your district who is not part of your base revenue limit, who's going to cost you money. The students in this case, most of them are 4-year-olds coming from the 3-year-old program run by the county. And so we get to actually increase our revenue limit for those students who are being served by the county, but now are coming into our classroom. And right now that's just a projection, and they'll be certifying that amount later on this summer. I indicated that the declining enrollment exemption would come into the calculation. That's the amount you see next. There's $893,006. That is, we're allowed that amount of revenue for 1 more year. So that's added on, and it comes to a total revenue limit with all exemptions of $54,173,983. And now comes the part where it's a real guess on what's going to happen. They have not certified our equalization aid yet. That'll be done. The final certification will be done in October. they'll do a preliminary first part of July. But based on talking to, based on information I have and talking to Robert W. Baird, our consultant there, they keep a very close eye on what the numbers are doing. And with their assistance, I projected that our state aid should come in about $32,190,512 based on some of the factors that Baird was using on what they think will happen to state aid next year.
DPI doesn't put out anything anymore?
Early
No.
July.
Early July,
They
so
will
put it
early
on.
July.
And it's an estimate at that point.
About half the districts approve their budget before July, and we're happen to be one of those this year, that we're hoping to approve a budget before July. That state aid gets subtracted from a revenue limit, and that leaves the allowable tax levy. In theory, allowable revenue limit to be used for tax levy. That amount is $21,983,471. There's a few other items that would be added or subtracted from that amount. One of the budget adjustments was to put money into the debt service fund from Fund 10. That means there'll be sufficient money in the debt service fund to pay all of the payments out of debt service that are due next year. And so there is no need for a debt service levy at this time, so there's no debt service levy added onto that amount. There is a small amount added on, $2,609. And what that is that's payments that have been made by the school district this year to different municipalities. One of them is a city, and I forget the other municipality, but municipalities that are not able to collect taxes get to charge back the school portion of that tax to the school district, to the municipality that levied that tax. So part of that was, we had to pay part of that back. The tech school had to pay part of that levy back. So any of the levying districts that levied tax for that property has to pay back the municipality that wasn't able to collect the tax. However, state law then allows you to levy that on the next tax levy. So adjust that up by $2,609. You subtract off the state aid for exempt computers. That decreases your tax levy, and that brings in a tax levy, projected tax levy at this time, based on the numbers we have available, $21,839,514. And then I did a little computation at the bottom there. That's an increase of $439,644, or just over 3%. Any questions? The next, you can ignore the sheet that comes next. That's just a summary where it shows if we under levy or what happens to if we over levy. This will set up a warning flag and tell us how much we over levied or under levied. And we levied the exact amount, so there's no, it comes to zero on this page. The next sheet that we have in the budget booklet is the state aid projection. And what I did was I took the factors that I got from Baird and plugged them into this formula. And I don't know, does somebody want me to go through this in any detail, or?
No.
It's a complicated, it's another complicated calculation. It's not as interesting as revenue limit formula.
Well, and I thought it was good
It's
to kind of
more
walk
technical.
through this a little bit, just as a review to the board, to,
Yeah.
and for the public, so that kind of
But
hear how some of this works.
The state aid calculation is even more complicated than the revenue limit. But anyway, by plugging in the variables and projecting our revenue and our expenditures in various funds, and then and what I will comment on is that we have a 3-tier system for state aid. If you look on the top right side of this sheet, you'll see there's a primary cost, there's a secondary cost calculation, and there's a tertiary cost calculation. And what it does is you take your total expenditures, net expenditures for the year after the computation on the left-hand side, and you plug it into those 3 tiers, and then there's guaranteed amounts, and then you add those up, those 3 different tiers, and you get your finals, and then you make some adjustments for payments to Milwaukee and all those charter school deductions, which in our case, it's pretty significant. $464,000 is being cut out of our state aid. And it generates a state aid of $32,190,512.
So next year, we could see deductions for voucher schools that could be quite significant for our district, could we not?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the state is funding those. If they're funding that with the general school aid, or they're going to have a separate appropriation for that. I don't know.
Well, it's already been published, and we're seeing this tax rate went up 9.5%.
Because of vouchers. Okay.
They've also been
I don't know how
giving
that's gonna
tax,
impact.
they've also been talking about giving tax credit in lieu of an actual
Right.
voucher, so.
So how much that'll increase or decrease our state aid, I have no idea.
Because that's the biggest thing with vouchers, is that that's the unhidden, what they don't talk about is the cost that it actually will increase your, I mean, it could increase instead of 3%, we'd be looking at 8 or 10% because of voucher schools. That's what it does. And they don't talk about that. They're not telling the public that, but that's what's the reality.
At this point, I have nothing to base any projection on.
I don't know what they're doing for sure.
The next document is the budget for adoption. And it's a shorter version of the more detailed sheets that are behind it. The detailed sheets behind it are what actually gets filed with DPI for the budget. The shorter version is what you actually got. As changes get made within a area, there doesn't need to be any action by the board to change that. So there can be changes from within a function. In other words, function would be regular curriculum. We can make changes at Lincoln High School. Most of the teachers and staff at Lincoln High School majority of them are regular curriculum. There are some also special ed and some other physical education. I shouldn't have said that. There are quite a few different areas. There's vocational curriculum, but as long as, let's say you hire a science teacher and don't hire a English teacher, it's all within regular curriculum, so it has no impact on the budget that you adopt. It has an impact on what we report to DPI, but it doesn't have an impact on what the board adopts. Because the board adopts an amount for regular curriculum, but DPI wants it broken down into different areas. The way I'm going to take a look at this budget for adoption, I think, is was this handed out?
Didn't see it.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the graphs, I think, probably
It's in here.
help you better to understand what's in this budget document. The numbers are the same, at least they're supposed to be the same. Verify that. $60,402,575 proposed revenue budget, yes. Okay. The budget that's proposed for revenue, you'll see there on the top, it's broken out, local sources, intermediate sources, state, well, let me explain what intermediate sources. Intermediate sources are money you might get from the tech school or from other school districts. State sources obviously is money received from the state, and it's not just state aid, it's also grants and other state revenue. Federal sources is the federal grants received. Other sources are transfers, other non-program revenue. Let's see if I can come up with a better description of what that is. It's basically miscellaneous revenue. It's miscellaneous revenue. Part of that is the money you get from Medicare. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Medicare, we get money from Medicare for some of our special ed students. That's what's in that area. So you'll see the money received from local sources makes up 37% of our total budget. And then as you go down, money we get from the tech school and other school districts represents about 2%. And then state sources.
That would include 6603s, for example. Or not?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It does include 6603s. So where we have students enrolling in our virtual program, that's intermediate sources. We get payments from other school districts for those students to participate in our virtual school. That $1.3 million is really up substantially from what it was 4 years ago, before we started the virtual school. Most of that money is money from the virtual, over half of that money is money from the virtual school, of that $1,342,000, or what we're projecting for next year. Then you'll see that the bulk of the revenue that you operate with comes from the state, and the bulk of that is equalization aid. We do get state grants, but those are relatively minor compared to the $32 million or something that we're projecting for state regular education aid, generally. We get about $1 million, just under, well, it's going down because of sequestration, but it was just over $2 million. We're anticipating a drop next year, and depending on the future of our federal grants. And then you see the other two items, other sources, which is the Medicare money received, and then the bottom line, non-program sources. That's money from federal grants in Fund 27, for special education money, that we can charge. The state does a calculation, and you can actually charge that grant for administration costs in Fund 10. So we've done that the last 2 years, and this year we're planning to do it again next year, and we're projecting about $50,000 for that. So it's in the total scope of our total budget, it's a small amount, but it's a significant amount. So it'll pay for a salary, for somebody. And so we've started doing that and claiming our indirect costs towards the special education federal funds. That makes up the revenue that we're projecting for next year. The expenditures I've broken out two different ways. One way is based on what kind of program is paying for. That's the first sheet. That has instruction on it, says instruction at 64%. And then I broke it out another way, and that's a type of expense. In other words, is it salaries, is it a benefit, some other kind of cost. And so I thought it'd be interesting to look at how they break out both ways. So looking at the first one, you'll see that of your total general fund budget, 64% of it is for student instruction. And then there's a bunch of other categories that make up the balance of that budget. 4% is for pupil services. Pupil services are such things as guidance, psychologists, social workers, those students those staff that assist students or families but don't actually do instruction in a classroom. Guidance counselors will go into a classroom, but that's not their main focus. They just work with students in different areas. Then there's an area, staff services, $220,000, which represents about 5% of your budget. That's your library media. That's basically the bulk of it. It's your library media and your AV. Thank you. Yeah, the projector up there. That's your AV services. Then there's general administration. That includes the Board of Ed. It's 1%. Includes superintendent's office, secretary. The next area, building administration. That's your buildings, your secretaries in your buildings, and their expenses, their supplies. There's a business administration, and what I did is I took business administration, I broke it into three different areas. Really, all three of those areas, business administration, custodial maintenance, pupil transportation, are all considered business administration. But I thought for your purposes, you see a difference between custodial and maintenance and the business office and, what's the other area? And pupil transportation. I mean, to you, they're totally separate areas. And so what I did is I split them out. So we have business administration, which includes internal services, copy machines, things like that. Then there's custodial and maintenance, which is about 6%, and then pupil transportation, which the bulk of that is contracted, although we do operate. And you'll see that there's a difference when you look at this graph, and it says transportation of $2,740,000. And you look at the next sheet, the next page, and you'll see there's transportation there again. Where is it here? Pupil transportation, $2,647,000. They're not the same because one is the transportation on the second page. Pupil transportation is what you pay to contractors. Okay, and it doesn't include special education. That's another.
In other words, we have a series of vans and.
Yeah, that's another 300.
That we own.
Yeah, $350,000 of special education transport. That's not on here, but so you see there's a difference in those two numbers, because on this sheet it includes our transportation secretary and other other transportation costs. And then on the other sheet, it's just what we pay to the contractors for general transportation, which includes field trips, co-curricular, to school and home, and between schools. So they're not exactly the same, but they're very close.
It also includes any parochial school transportation.
You're right.
Which one
Yeah, we pay for parochial transportation. Both of these actually include parochial transportation also, on both numbers. Where was I on pupil transport? Okay, then we have another area, which is central services, insurance and judgments, and I just lumped them all together. It's your, let's see, what are some of the other areas in there? But it represents 3% of your budget. And then the non-program is transfers from general fund to other funds.
You also got a few problems with your percentages in the last two items.
What's that?
The percentages aren't 21% and 17%. It should be like 2.1 and 1.7.
Yeah,
Something like
okay,
that.
I apologize for that.
Yeah.
I didn't check the formula on those. Should have done that. Yes, there's, obviously, if 2.7 million is just under 5%, 1.9 million wouldn't be 21%. Thank you, John. Sorry about that. So anyway, that's a breakdown of the programs of different areas that is funded in the general fund. The next sheet breaks it down by type of expense. Is it salaries or benefit? Is it a capital item? And what you see there is salaries, just salaries alone make up about 55% of your general fund budget. You add on benefits of 26%, and you have a total payment for just employees' compensation of 81% of your general fund budget goes towards employee compensation. And then you'll see other purchase services. It's services you get from CISA. It includes reimbursement for mileage, it includes travel. Bulk of it is payments to CISA or other programs. I broke out utilities. I thought that'd be an interesting number. Sometimes and next month at the Business Services Committee, our building grounds director will be updating you similar to last year on what our utilities have done. And surprisingly, they weren't too bad. He's also going to report on snow plowing, but that was a little worse. But utilities, the new equipment, the new boilers you installed are more efficient. They just are. And then I broke out the payment to the contractors for pupil transportation. And this is just the payment for the general fund. This doesn't include the payment for special education. Non-capital supplies, that's your just what you consider general supplies. Then there's capital equipment. That number for the last few years has been down quite a bit over what it used to be. But it's still a large number. Debt service costs, that's the cost for the short-term borrowing. Insurance costs, $445,000 is being budgeted there. And then transfers to other funds. Those are transfers to bulk of that, the largest portion of that is the transfer to Fund 38. Now that's different than Fund 39. Fund 38 is the non-referendum debt, and that's for the WRS refinancing that the board did. And then other expenses, and that's like dues and fees paid for various organizations. And fortunately, those, at least the budget total there is the same on both sheets, $58,432,842. That's a breakdown of your general fund budget. There are two other graphs behind those documents. One is a tax levy history. It shows, those are, you see the numbers to the right, those are amount of the tax levy, and then across the bottom are the years. And so back in 1992, the tax levy was just under 20 million. We have exceeded that amount the last 2 years, and you'll see the change in the tax levy since 1992, or over the last 21 years. On the bottom is a tax rate graph, and it shows the tax rate dropping from about just over 19 mils in 1992 down to a low of under 8 mils. And let's see, that would have been about 2007, 2008. And then as state aid has been, as the state has drawn back, there's support, that tax levy has increased slightly. We're just at over 10 mils in 2013. Any questions on any of those?
No, but as far as looking at the tax levy history, you have to remember these numbers back here were when we were getting 2/3 funding, which was about 67%.
Yes, that's correct.
And now we're getting about 57%, which makes 10% less that we're getting from the state.
There are other funds in this booklet, and what I'm going to do is I'll just jump through them, explain what they are, and you see the budget amounts there. The Special Projects Fund, I don't know if you're on page 8. We have revenues budgeted of $10,478,381, and expenditures budgeted of $10,482,772. Two funds there, Fund 27, Fund 29, balance out. The difference between the revenue and the expenditure comes from Fund 29, Fund 21, and Fund 21 is Special Projects Fund. If money comes in that carries over from one year to the next, you can account for that in Fund 21, because in Fund 10, your year ends and you don't carry money forward. In Fund 21, you can carry money forward from one year to the next. And so if there's a special project, a special grant or money that we get from some other organization for purpose of, I don't know.
Well, like the Japan Foundation.
Yes. And also, we had some money in here for different projects around the district. That will be in Fund 21, and then that rolls forward to next year, if there's money left for that purpose. You'll see the debt service fund there, that's both Fund 38 and 39. And you'll you'll see that the budget has significantly decreased. That's because from prior year, part of that is you did some debt defeasance last year, and you also did some refinancing of the WRPS debt at a lower interest rate. Those significantly inflated or increased the amount that was in the budget for debt service. The amount proposed for next year includes just the payments on the 3 remaining bond issues that I mentioned. The employee retirement benefits, the I forget what it was called now. QZAB, thank you. QZAB money, and then the regular referendum that we ran for the renovation in the district. Fund 50, I think we know what that is. That's food service fund. All the program revenue there. You saw that you had to increase your meal prices because of the federal statutes that you have to keep pace with the federal reimbursement rate. So that's in that projection of the revenue, and then we projected expenditures of $2,727,620. Trust funds, Fund 72 and Fund 73. Fund 72 drops off. The last year we had expenditures in that fund was in 2011-12. That will now drop off next year, or dropped off this year, and it's no longer in the budget numbers for next year. The budget there is just for the OPEB liability, the revenue which comes from Fund 10, and then the expenditures which get paid back to Fund 10. So some of the money has to remain in Fund 72 when you do that, in order to claim the expense of the money that you put into Fund 73, the OPEB trust fund. You have to contribute at least 5% more than the pay-as-you-go cost of your health insurance benefits. So you'll see the revenue is slightly higher than the expenditures because 5% has to remain in that fund by the DPI regulations. And then Fund 80, you'll see that the ending fund balance there will be 0 at the end of next year. And the total expenses that were dramatically curtailed from this year. This year we had a budget of $400,000. Next year it's $100,000. All that's left in Fund 80 budget for next year is the swim program, and I think it pays for the liaison officer. I think that's all that's left in that fund. And then once that is depleted, you have to make a decision. I think the legislative proposal is that you can't levy there anymore. So I'm not sure that the fund, I don't know what the status of Fund 80 will be in the future. I guess
It's not clear whether or not, there's some thought that you cannot levy, you can only levy at what you levied last year, what we didn't levy in that last year.
we didn't
There's
levy
some-
last year because we had sufficient balance to cover all the expenditures there.
But depending on what you read, it might also be that you could levy no more than what you levied in the last, what the last time you levied in that category, which can't be
It's-
more than that. So that's,
It's very unclear at this point on what the status of Fund 80 is for our district.
A lot of districts are misusing it, aren't they? And the state is
That's
looking at
the claim.
auditing it.
That's the claim. I don't believe we were.
No. I
Thank
don't
you.
either.
But that's that. And I'm not gonna go through all of the
That would be
the
good.
detail. This basically is what gets uploaded to the DPW.
Are there any questions about anything Dan shared at this point?
I'd just like to thank you for your very detailed explanation. Good. Thanks.
It's a clear explanation.
And if you want any changes in the future, just let me know and I'll try to incorporate them.
Okay.
If I'm around next year.
Exciting reading. Any other questions for Dan?
Can I ask a question?
That's Gary? Okay, yes, you may, Jim.
Just curiosity of comparing with last year's. There was on page 10 of last year, you had a line, I call it a line entry, 10R718. It's not here on this year, or on the projected,
Yes.
and that was federal stimulus aid. Is that all gone?
What was the line number again?
10R718, federal stimulus aid?
Yes.
Is that money all gone? Is that why it
That money
disappeared?
is,
Yes, that's
that
Or did the money
money is
go
all gone.
somewhere else?
That was a federal stimulus.
Right.
money, And that's all dried up.
Okay, that's what I was just,
You're absolutely right on that.
yeah.
I can't stop it.
I just didn't know if that money was moved to some other account or
No.
it just all one thing.
That was just paid out for a couple of years, and then we had until, I think it was end of September this year to spend all of it, and then there's no more back in the future.
Okay.
Are there any other public questions or comments? Okay, if not, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing portion.
Make a motion to close the public hearing portion of our budget hearing.
Second.
Okay, motion a second to close the public hearing portion of the meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then we can move on to action on 2013-14 proposed budget, including action to approve a resolution to commit 13-14 district fund balance.
I would make a motion to approve the proposed 2013-14 district budget, including the resolution to commit any remaining 2013-14 district fund balance to funding the district's OPEB liability.
Second.
Okay, motion is second to approve the proposed 2013-14 district budget, including a resolution to commit any remaining 2013-14 district fund balance to the funding the district's OPEB liability. Maureen, can we please have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Rayo?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Mrs. Hett?
Yes.
Mrs. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Krings?
Yes. Thank you, Maureen. And looks like now we're on to presentation and approval of recommended tax levy.
Already did.
You want to just reiterate? Do we want to, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, or
Okay.
it was at the bottom of that very first
Yeah.
worksheet we went through.
The tax levy that
This is our
is
best
being
estimate at this
recommended
time.
this time is $21,839,514, and where that, how that was calculated was based on the revenue sheet, which I first went through first, and then that was built into the budget. Is that what you're?
So we need a separate motion for that.
Yes, we do.
So I'd make a motion to approve the approximated 2013-14 tax levy in the amount of $21,839,514. Second.
Okay, motion is second to approve the 2013-14 tax levy in the amount of $21,839,514. Maureen, can we please have a roll call vote?
Mr. Krings?
Yes.
Mr. Bembo?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Rayo?
Yes.
Mrs. Hett?
Yes.
Mrs. Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Medina?
Yes.
Thank you, Maureen. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.